We're continuing in Numbers chapter 11, and we've seen this challenge of what do our hearts crave? Are we full of it? What's in us? Is it grumbling? Is it desires for current pleasures and treasures of this passing world? We've never learned to say no to those things. So the Lord will teach us how to say no to those things, no to grumbling, no to the passions and pleasures, the deceitful desires of this passing age, and how to say yes to Christ, who is our real pleasure and treasure. But there's this lovely section from Numbers 11 verse 16 where the Lord can see what's the problem, that the spirit that's in them is just the spirit like of flesh, the what's the life that's energizing them is just the life of the flesh. The disgruntlement, the selfishness, the trying to get life from food rather than from the living God. So what he does, the Lord, verse 16 says, "Gather to me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them, and bring them to the tabernacle of meeting, that they may stand there with you. Then I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take of the spirit that's on you and put the same on them, and then they shall bear the burden of the people." So we already know there's a kind of big, extensive, small church group system throughout that ancient church, because you remember that's what Jethro organized them to do back in Exodus 18. So they had all these church leaders distributed throughout the ancient church in that way, but they weren't doing the job properly because they needed to be filled with the Spirit rather than the flesh. So what the Lord does is he summons the top level leaders, I suppose we'd say like bishops really, and you can see that Moses gets this. He has got the Spirit of Christ in him. And you remember he in Hebrews 11:26 says, "He forsook all those pleasures and luxuries of Egypt for the sake of Christ." So Moses had learned to say no to the cucumbers and melons and meat and fish and everything. He'd say, "No, that's perfectly nice, but Christ is the one I really desire." And Moses was like that because he was daily filled with the Spirit. And that's what it is to be a Christian, a follower of Jesus. Every day we seek to be filled with the Spirit rather than filled with the flesh. Moses was like that, filled with the Spirit. And so the Lord summons these church leaders, 70 of them, to himself. And then he's going to come and preach to them and stir up in them the Spirit and breathe the Spirit upon them, the Spirit that's in Moses, share the Spirit out. It's almost like a little day of Pentecost moment. And they are to be filled with the Spirit. And then I guess the idea is that these top level leaders would go and do the same. Lay hands on these other church leaders, and pray for the Spirit to fill them. And then that would go down throughout the entire ancient church. And then, we can look at more about what happens next in a moment, but or maybe in our next study. But when the Spirit comes upon them, then they do start to preach in this way, like they become, even if only momentarily, even only for a moment, they become the sorts of church leaders and people that they should have been. Full of the Spirit, daily filled, seeking him. So the challenge really then is we've been thinking about this problem that what happens when our church fellowship, if we have allowed grumbling to come in, because if we do that, seems small, niggles, gripes, become grumbles, then destroy us. And because we give room to grumbling, there's no room for gratitude, and then we can't help new believers who need help in saying no to the passions of this world. Rather, we're the ones who are actually craving things of this world. It's a terrible situation to be in, because it's the opposite of what we should be, which is spirit-filled people. And we can be filled with the Spirit. As believers, we'll be filled with the Spirit, but that won't last if we grieve the Spirit through grumbling and our deceitful desires. We'll be spiritless, we'll be empty, we'll be weak, we'll be barren. And so that's the challenge that we're looking at here in Numbers 11, particularly if we're in any sort of leadership in the church, that there's a way in which the church won't grow higher than our level. So if we are not spirit-filled people who've learned to say no to grumbling and deceitful desires, how are we going to pass that on? How can we lead our church fellowship into an experience of Christ that we don't have? So there was the challenge to take the top 70, make them spirit-filled believers, passionate for Christ, that then they could share it out. Did they do that? Were they able to do that? Well, we're going to see the answers. No.